My name is Mara Ellison. I was 31 years old, the eldest child in a family that called me strong whenever they needed permission not to show up. When I opened my eyes after surgery, I couldn't remember where I was. The ceiling above me was too white. A machine pulsed steadily beside the bed, and something tightened around my legs every few seconds. My mouth felt dry enough to crack, but when I tried to move, a sharp line of pain burned across my abdomen. A nurse leaned into view. "Mara, you're in recovery. The procedure is finished." I tried to answer, but only air came out. She gave me a damp sponge for my lips and told me the surgeon had needed to make a larger incision than planned. I heard pieces of what she said, mass removed. One ovary, doctor would explain, but I kept looking past her. There was a blue vinyl chair against the wall. It was empty. "My mother," I whispered. The nurse glanced toward the doorway before checking my chart. "We haven't been able to reach anyone in the waiting area." For several seconds, I thought Elaine Ellison must have stepped out for coffee. Maybe my father had taken her downstairs. Maybe they were parking. Maybe the surgery had ended early. Then I remembered the last thing Mom had said when I asked her to stay. "Your brother only graduates once." The nurse adjusted my blanket and asked whether there was someone else she could call. I told her not yet, because admitting there was no one felt worse than the pain. I had spent most of my life being the person everyone called. At Rosewood Hall, my family's wedding venue, I managed staffing, vendors, schedules, maintenance, payroll preparation, and every emergency my parents didn't know how to solve. If something broke at midnight, I answered. If my brother Caleb missed a deadline, I helped him fix it. If Mom forgot a promise, I made sure no one else suffered for it. But when I opened my eyes after abdominal surgery, there wasn't one Ellison in that room. That night, after I had been moved upstairs, a nurse placed my phone on the tray beside me. There were no missed calls from Mom. Dad had sent one message asking whether the doctor had given me a discharge estimate. Beneath it was another question about a vendor invoice at Rosewood Hall. Then I saw the social media notifications. Mom had uploaded 43 photographs from Caleb's graduation trip. In the first one, Caleb stood on the deck of a large coastal house with his graduation stole around his neck. Mom had one arm around him. Dad held a glass toward the camera. My aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the space behind them. I kept swiping. Everyone was there. They were eating seafood around a long table, walking beside the ocean, holding matching glasses beneath strings of lights. In one photograph, 17 members of my family stood together on the beach while Caleb smiled from the center. I wasn't angry that they celebrated him. Caleb had worked for his degree, and I had always wanted good things for him. What broke something inside me was how complete they looked without me. Then I read Mom's caption, "Glad the whole family made it." I read it twice. The pain medication made the words blur, but it couldn't change them. My mother had looked at a photograph taken while her daughter was under anesthesia 5 hours away and decided no one important was missing. I lowered the phone and stared at the empty chair again. For years, I'd believed Caleb was celebrated while I was depended upon, because those were simply different forms of love. That night, I began to wonder whether usefulness was the only place my family had ever made for me. But another question hurt even more. My parents knew the surgery was happening. Why had every aunt, uncle, and cousin gone with them? Why hadn't one person called to ask who would take me home? I didn't know yet that almost everyone in those photographs had been told a lie. Before I explain who told it and what happened when I stopped protecting them, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and like the video. If you have ever been called strong by people who used your strength as an excuse to leave you alone, you are part of the community this story is for. To understand why that empty chair changed my life, we need to go back 3 days before the operation. I was in the administrative office at Rosewood Hall when Mom told me she wouldn't be at the hospital. The venue occupied a restored country estate outside Richmond. Couples saw chandeliers, gardens, and polished floors. I saw maintenance deadlines, staff shortages, insurance renewals, and the hundreds of invisible decisions required to make beautiful events look effortless. Mom stood on the other side of my desk, scrolling through the itinerary for Caleb's coastal trip. "I thought you were coming back after the graduation ceremony," I said. That was before everyone committed to the full week. You committed to staying with me, her expression tightened. We have discussed this, Mara. Your brother only graduates once, and this operation only happens once. She lowered her phone. You don't know that. The sentence landed harder than she intended. The specialist couldn't confirm whether the mass was benign until it was removed. It had grown large enough to cause increasing pain, and my doctor had warned me about the possibility of torsion or rupture. I had already delayed the operation once during Rosewood Hall's busiest month. This time, postponing it wasn't medically responsible. I'm not asking everyone to cancel, I said. I'm asking one of you to come back. Dad sat near the window with the venue's financial reports open on his tablet. He had been silent through most of the conversation. The rental is non-refundable, he said finally, and we're taking 3 vehicles. Changing the arrangement now would affect everyone. It was typical of my father to translate an emotional decision into transportation and money. Numbers allowed him to sound neutral, even when his silence had already chosen a side. Then Mom can drive back, I said. Or you can. Mom exhaled slowly. You'll be in a hospital surrounded by trained professionals. Caleb asked for 1 week with his entire family before everyone goes back to their lives. Entire family. The phrase passed so quickly that I almost missed it. I'm your family, too. No one said you weren't. You're both leaving me to have surgery alone. Mom's voice softened, which somehow made it worse. You are the strongest person I know. You've always handled things better than Caleb. He needs us there. You'll sleep through most of the day anyway. Dad looked down at his tablet. I waited for him to disagree with her. He didn't. Mom had originally promised she would sit in the hospital until I woke. I had entered her name as my primary contact, given the number to the surgical team, and told my closest friend Imani that she didn't need to rearrange her work schedule because my mother would be there. Now, Mom was treating that promise as if it had been a tentative reservation. What am I supposed to do when they discharge me, I asked. We'll be back before you're ready to leave, Dad said. Open abdominal surgery usually required more than 1 night in the hospital, so his answer sounded practical. It also allowed both of them to leave without confronting what I had actually asked. I wasn't asking for transportation. I was asking not to wake up alone. Mom stepped around the desk and squeezed my shoulder. We'll call as soon as you're out. Then she asked whether I had finished the staffing plan for the following weekend. That was the moment I should have understood. My parents were prepared to leave the state while surgeons operated on me, but they still expected me to make sure Rosewood Hall functioned without interruption. I told Mom the schedule was in the shared system. She smiled, thanked me, and walked out with Dad. I watched them cross the ballroom where employees were preparing for another wedding. Mom stopped twice to adjust table settings. Dad checked the lock on a service door. Neither of them looked back toward my office. At the time, I told myself I would be fine. I told myself the hospital had nurses, Imani could come if something went wrong, and my parents deserved to celebrate Caleb. I didn't understand that the chair beside my hospital bed was already empty. I simply hadn't awakened to see it yet. 3 mornings later, the future I had already shown you caught up with me. I checked into the hospital alone before sunrise. At registration, I gave the clerk Mom's number and repeated that she was my designated support person. Is she parking? The clerk asked. She's traveling, but she'll answer. I still believed that part. Mom had sent a message before boarding the car for the coast. You've got this. Call us when you're awake. There was something almost impressive about how she converted abandonment into encouragement. The anesthesiologist reviewed the risks. My surgeon reminded me that she might need to make a larger incision and remove the affected ovary. If anything appeared malignant, the decisions could become more serious. Do you have questions? She asked. Only one mattered. Will someone contact my mother when it's over? We'll call the number you provided. I nodded and signed the form. By midnight, the operation was over, the chair was empty, and I had read Mom's caption. That was where the version of me who always understood everyone else began to disappear. The next morning, I called Imani. She answered before the second ring. How are you feeling? I tried to say I was fine. The word reached my throat and stopped there. My mom didn't come. There was a brief silence. What do you mean she didn't come? She went on the trip. I thought she was returning after the graduation. So did I. Imani asked which room I was in. I told her she didn't need to leave work immediately, but she interrupted me. I didn't ask whether you could survive until this afternoon. I asked for your room number. That difference broke through the last of my control. Imani rearranged her appointments with the school, drove to the hospital, and entered my room carrying a phone charger, lip balm, and a sweater because she knew I was always cold. She stopped when she saw the incision beneath my gown. They had to open you up? I nodded. And your parents are still at the coast? Yes. She placed everything on the tray, sat in the chair, and took my hand. Imani didn't tell me to forgive anyone. She didn't announce that she would always be there or make my pain into an opportunity to prove what a good friend she was. She simply stayed. Mom finally called late that morning. I could hear wind behind her and Caleb laughing somewhere nearby. There she is, Mom said brightly. How's my brave girl? I looked at Imani. Her mouth tightened, but she remained silent. They had to make an abdominal incision, I said. They removed my left ovary. Mom's voice dropped. Oh, Mara, I'm sorry it became more complicated. I waited for her to say she was coming back. Instead, she asked, did they say when they might release you? Not yet. We're scheduled to return Sunday, so the timing may work out perfectly. Perfectly. I woke up alone. You were in recovery, sweetheart. They wouldn't have let us sit beside you there anyway. There was no one in the waiting room when they tried to give an update. A pause followed. We made the decision we thought was best for the entire family. I know you're emotional right now, but Caleb needed this week. The entire family again. Before I could respond, Dad's voice came through the phone. Mara, while we have you, did you approve the floral vendor's revised invoice? Your mother can't find it. Imani closed her eyes. I stared at the phone. I'm in a hospital bed. I understand. I only need to know whether you approved it. No, you didn't approve it. No, I'm not working. Dad cleared his throat. We aren't asking you to work. We're asking a simple question. The answer is in the vendor folder. Which folder? I ended the call. My hand shook so badly that I almost dropped the phone. Imani took it and placed it beyond my reach. Good, she said. That wasn't good. They need that invoice. Mara, you have staples in your abdomen. Sutures, that correction is exactly the problem. I laughed once, then grabbed a pillow against my stomach because even laughing hurt. The hospital kept me for 2 more nights. Imani came before work, returned afterward, and arranged to stay at my townhouse when I was discharged. The first time she helped me stand, I apologized 3 times. You supported me through a divorce, she reminded me. You sat on my kitchen floor until 2 in the morning while I tried to understand why someone who promised to love me had treated my pain like an inconvenience. That was different. Why? I didn't have an answer. Accepting care felt more vulnerable than surgery. I knew how to endure pain. I didn't know how to let someone witness it without immediately calculating what I owed them. On my 2nd day in the hospital, Rosewood Hall's scheduling system sent an alert about an understaffed wedding. Then came a maintenance question, followed by a request for the updated insurance certificate. I ignored all 3. Mom sent a separate message. We know you're recovering, but refusing to answer creates stress for everyone. That sentence showed me the role I had played for years. Caleb's uncertainty created a reason to protect him. Mom's stress created a problem someone else had to resolve. Dad's discomfort created silence. My pain created an inconvenience. I opened my work email and sent a formal notice that I was activating medical leave. I attached the hospital documentation and copied both my parents. Dad responded within 11 minutes. How long do you expect to be unavailable? I looked down at the bandage across my abdomen. Until my doctor clears me. For once, I didn't add an apology. When Imani drove me home, I couldn't fasten the seatbelt without help. I couldn't stand upright. I couldn't lift a bag or lower myself onto the couch without planning each movement. My parents had spent years calling me independent. But independence was no longer physically available to me. I had to let Imani fill my water glass, organize my medication, and help me shower without allowing shame to turn every kindness into debt. The morning after I came home, my phone displayed 14 missed calls from Rosewood Hall. I turned it off. Rosewood Hall did not collapse because I stopped answering. It simply became slower, more expensive, and less polished. A caterer received 2 different load-in times. A temporary staff member was assigned to the wrong event. Dad discovered that knowing how much the venue earned was not the same as knowing how it operated. Mom kept sending questions disguised as personal concern. How is your pain today? Also, where do you store the updated vendor agreements? Did you sleep well? The weekend timeline is missing. Please call when you're awake. It's urgent. Every message reminded me that they could monitor my availability from 5 hours away, but had not occupied one chair when I needed them. I muted the work accounts and slept. 4 days after the surgery, one of my aunts sent me a message. Your mother told us you weren't feeling well. I hope you can still enjoy Caleb's photos. When is the operation now? I read the last sentence again. Now? I called her. She answered cheerfully, then fell silent when she heard my voice. Auntie, when did Mom say my surgery was happening? She said it had been moved. Moved to when? After the trip. I thought that was why everyone went. My skin turned cold. Who is everyone? The family group. Your mother posted the update before we left. I asked her to send me a screenshot. A minute later, the image appeared. Mom's message had been posted 2 days before she spoke to me at Rosewood Hall. She told the family that my procedure had been moved until after the graduation trip and that no one needed to adjust their plans. She added that I was relieved the timing had worked out. Dad was included in the conversation. So was Caleb. Several relatives had responded with relief. One had offered to bring meals when the new date was confirmed. No new date existed. Mom had not merely chosen the trip. She had removed the possibility that anyone else might choose me. My aunt's voice trembled. Mara, I swear I didn't know. I believe you. Why would she tell us that? I looked toward the couch where Amani had arranged my medication. Because if everyone knew the truth, someone might have stayed. I ended the call and stared at the screenshot. Until that moment, I had believed the photograph showed 17 relatives who knew I was in surgery and celebrated anyway. The truth was more complicated, but no less painful. Most of them had been misled. My father had not. Caleb's name in the group didn't tell me whether he had known the real date before Mom's announcement. I was too angry to consider the difference yet. My parents returned 2 days later. Mom arrived at my townhouse with Dad behind her. She looked rested. Dad carried his laptop. Neither asked whether they could come inside before Mom stepped through the door. Oh, honey. She moved toward me with open arms. I raised one hand. Don't. She stopped. You're angry. I understand. No, you don't. Dad set his laptop on my dining table. We came here to see you. Then why did you bring work? He glanced at the bag as if he had forgotten it was in his hand. Mom sat in the armchair opposite me. We called you. You called me after the surgery. We were receiving updates. The hospital couldn't reach you. There was poor service near the house. You posted 43 photographs. Her expression changed. Mara, I'm not going to apologize for celebrating your brother. I never asked you to. That is what this feels like. I opened the screenshot and held the phone toward her. Did you tell everyone my surgery was postponed? Dad looked at Mom. Her shoulders stiffened. I simplified the situation. You lied. I was trying to avoid panic. Your aunts would have created unnecessary drama, and someone would have felt obligated to cancel. That was their decision to make. It was a family trip that had been planned for months. And my operation was real. No one said it wasn't. You told them it wasn't happening. Dad lowered his voice. Your mother made a judgment call. You knew. He didn't answer. You received the same message. You knew the date hadn't changed. I didn't write it. There it was. The entire moral structure of my father's life in 4 words. He didn't write it. He simply allowed it to accomplish what he wanted. Before they left, Dad opened the laptop and asked whether I could show him how to access the payroll preparation files. I told him to read the operations manual. Mom rose sharply. You know he struggles with that system. I know. That's why I wrote the manual. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I'm recovering from surgery. It is hard. The next afternoon, my surgeon called with the pathology result. The mass was a benign mucinous cystadenoma. It had been large and needed to be removed, but there was no cancer. Relief moved through me so quickly that I cried. I called Imani first. Then I sent the result to my parents. Mom responded immediately. Thank God. See, everything worked out. The words wiped away my relief. I called her. You didn't know it was benign when you left. I know, but it is benign. That doesn't change what you knew when you made your choice. What do you want from me, Mara? You're healthy, Caleb had his graduation. We're all home. I want you to stop using the result to pretend the risk never existed. Mom sighed. I cannot keep apologizing for refusing to treat you like you were dying. I didn't ask you to treat me like I was dying. I asked you to treat me like I was your daughter. She ended the call soon afterward. That was when I stopped thinking of the trip as the central problem. The trip had ended. The lie, the empty chair, and the structure that created both were still with us. Once I was strong enough to sit at my desk for more than 20 minutes, I began making an inventory. Health insurance, savings, accumulated leave, employment terms. My parents had always referred to Rosewood Hall as something Caleb and I would share one day. Yet my name appeared on no deed, partnership agreement, succession document, or ownership record. I had a salary. I had promises. Only one of those was legally real. The truth embarrassed me. At work, I would never have advised an employee to exchange years of underpaid labor for verbal assurances. But I had accepted that arrangement because the people making the promises were my parents. I calculated how long my savings could cover insurance and living costs. I downloaded my performance records and the documents I was entitled to keep. I made copies of my medical leave approval. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning not to become trapped. Mom interpreted preparation as hostility. At the beginning of my 3rd week of recovery, she called and asked when I would resume limited remote work. I'm not cleared. You're already using a computer for personal things, so you could answer emails. That is work. It's the family business. It is also my employer. Her tone sharpened. Rosewood Hall paid your bills for years. I performed a job for years. Families don't keep score like this. I looked at the screenshot still saved on my phone. Apparently they do. Dad called the next day with a quieter version of the same demand. We're under pressure, he said. Your mother has had to cancel 2 client meetings to handle operations. That is what happens when a business has no backup. We trusted you. You concentrated 3 jobs in 1 position. You never complained. That was true. I had tried so hard not to become difficult that I had made exploitation look voluntary. Dad continued, Caleb is starting to think this is about him. Why would he think that? Because the trouble began after his trip. The trouble began when you left me alone. You're connecting things that don't need to be connected. They were connected before I noticed. Caleb called that evening. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I answered. Hey, he said, how are you? Healing. Good. That's good. He filled the silence with updates about graduation, the trip, and how overwhelmed Mom had become at Rosewood Hall. Then he said, I know you're upset, but I don't understand why you're taking it out on the business. I'm on medical leave. Mom says you won't even answer simple questions. Mom said my surgery had been postponed. He went silent. What? What date did you think I was having surgery? Next week. I closed my eyes. Caleb, I had it the day you all took the beach photograph. No, Mom said they moved it. They didn't. That doesn't make sense. I know. Why wouldn't she tell me? Why didn't you ask me? His breathing changed. You told me you couldn't come to graduation because I was preparing for surgery. I thought that was why it got moved. You thought the hospital rearranged an urgent operation so I could stay home while all of you went to the coast? I didn't think about it like that. That is the problem. He became defensive. You're acting like I planned this. I'm telling you what happened. I didn't know. And I didn't know you didn't know. Neither of us spoke. The difference mattered, but it didn't erase everything. Caleb had spent his life receiving family attention without questioning where the labor came from. Still, he had not sat at the coast knowingly waiting for me to come out of surgery. I'll send you the dates, I said. Mara, I'm tired. I ended the call and sent him my admission confirmation, Mom's message to the family, and the timestamp from the photograph. He didn't respond that night. The following morning, I opened an old email from Ana Duarte. Ana managed a civic arts and conference center in Richmond. We had worked together when her organization rented Rosewood Hall for an annual fundraiser. She had watched me handle a power failure, a staffing shortage, and 3 vendor problems without allowing the client to feel the chaos. Months earlier, she had written that if I ever wanted authority equal to my responsibilities, I should contact her. At the time, I had thanked her and deleted the draft of the resume I started. Now I restored it. I sent Anna a brief message. You once said I should contact you if I was ready for a change. I'm ready to discuss what that might look like. Her response arrived an hour later. Send me your resume. I can't promise an outcome, but there is a position opening, and I think you should apply. It wasn't rescue. It was a door. For the first time, I let myself consider walking through it. While I recovered, Caleb began helping at Rosewood Hall. I learned most of what happened through the questions he sent me and the things he admitted later. His first message concerned a caterer who refused to use an outdated loading schedule. Where is the current version? I responded with one sentence. Operations Manual, Section 4. An hour later, why are there 3 different staffing spreadsheets? Section 7. Then, who confirms the temporary liquor license documents? Compliance calendar, he called. I'm not asking you to work. I'm trying to understand your system. It isn't my system anymore. It's Rosewood Hall's system. Mom says you made it too complicated. I documented what the venue requires. Did you really do all of this? Yes. Every week? Some of it every day? He was quiet. Mom had introduced Caleb as Rosewood Hall's future marketing director. He had a degree, strong ideas, and genuine talent. But none of that taught him how to coordinate a maintenance contractor with a wedding timeline, or explain to a vendor why an unpaid invoice had been buried in Dad's email. I didn't enjoy watching him struggle. His struggle proved that my labor had been real, but it also showed how thoroughly our parents had failed both of us. They had turned me into infrastructure and Caleb into a symbol. Neither role allowed us to become ordinary adults. My first interview with Anna lasted an hour. She asked about staffing systems, crisis management, vendor negotiations, and the budgets I had overseen. When I described my responsibilities, she stopped taking notes. How many people currently perform this work? 1. You? Yes. What authority do you have to hire support? I can recommend it. Can you approve it? No. Do you hold equity? No. Anna set down her pen. Mara, I'm not asking these questions to criticize you. I need to understand why someone operating at this level has the title and compensation listed here. I looked at my resume. My family started the business. That explains why you stayed. It doesn't explain why the arrangement was fair. No one had ever separated those 2 questions for me. The interview process continued. I met members of the center's board and department leads. They challenged my plans and asked for examples. Nobody offered me a position because they felt sorry for me. That mattered. I wanted to be chosen for what I could do, not rescued because of what my parents had done. During the 5th week of my recovery, Caleb asked to see me. Imani was at my townhouse when he arrived. She greeted him politely and left us in the living room, but not before making it clear she would be nearby. Caleb sat across from me. He looked older than he had in the beach photographs. I went through the family chat, he said. I waited. I saw Dad asking about the invoice after your surgery. Then the staffing plan. Mom asked you about a client before she asked what the doctor removed. Yes. I also saw the original schedule. Your operation was on the shared calendar for 6 weeks. Yes. He rubbed his palms together. I should have known. You were told it changed. I should have asked you. I didn't rescue him from the discomfort. He continued, I thought you liked taking care of everything. I liked being good at my job. That isn't the same thing. No. He looked toward the floor. Mom keeps saying you're jealous of the trip. I wanted you to have a graduation celebration. I know. Do you? He raised his eyes. I'm starting to. His apology was imperfect. He explained too much. He repeated that he had not known until I reminded him that intention was only part of responsibility. But he did not ask me to return to Rosewood Hall. Before leaving, he said, I'm sorry you woke up alone. It was the first sentence anyone in my immediate family had offered that did not contain a defense. I cried after he left. Not because everything was repaired, because one person had finally named what happened without asking me to make it smaller. A week later, my surgeon cleared me to drive and gradually resumed normal activity. The incision had healed, though fatigue remained. She reminded me that healing tissue could look stronger before it actually was. The same was true of me. I could return to Rosewood Hall. I decided I would not. Anna offered me the operations director position 2 days after I received medical clearance. The Civic Center employed department coordinators, a facilities manager, and a finance team. I would have real authority, benefits, and a salary that made me stare at the number twice. I asked for 24 hours to consider it. Then I accepted. My resignation letter to Rosewood Hall was brief. I gave notice, identified my final date, and confirmed that the operations manual and transition documents were current. I requested a formal meeting with my parents. Mom read the letter once and placed it on the table between us. No, it isn't a request. You cannot leave us during wedding season. My notice complies with my employment terms. Dad frowned. You've been speaking to a lawyer? I read my contract. We don't need contracts between family members, Mom said. You needed one when you hired me. We built this for you and Caleb. You built it for yourselves. You said we might own it someday. You would have. When? Dad leaned forward. We have always intended to divide things fairly. Then show me the plan. He said nothing. Mom's face hardened. So this is about ownership. It is about realizing I gave my life to promises you could change whenever something more important came along. This is punishment. No, punishment would be damaging the venue. I'm giving notice and a complete transition. You are abandoning your family because we celebrated your brother. I'm leaving my job because you treated my health as movable and my labor as permanent. Mom stood. I will not let you rewrite this into some story where we never loved you. I'm not saying you never loved me. Then what are you saying? That your love kept requiring me to need less. Dad looked away. I worked through the notice period without exceeding my medical restrictions. I updated vendor contacts, compliance dates, staffing procedures, and emergency protocols. The operations manual reached more than 200 pages. Caleb helped verify the marketing sections, but no longer pretended to understand the entire business. Mom attended transition meetings with visible resentment. Dad asked detailed questions he could have asked years earlier. On my last afternoon, I placed my Rosewood Hall keys on the conference table. Mom stared at them. You don't have to do this. I already did. Your new employer will never care about you the way family does. I looked at the keys. That's fine. They're paying me to perform a job, not asking me to confuse employment with love. I left Rosewood Hall before the evening staff arrived. There was no dramatic confrontation in the ballroom. Nothing shattered behind me. The building remained exactly where it had always been. The only thing that changed was who carried it. 3 days later, Mom posted in the extended family chat. She said my health scare had made me emotional and that I had resigned because I couldn't separate Caleb's graduation from the family business. She asked everyone to give me space until I stopped punishing the family. I read the message twice. The old version of me would have remained silent. She would have believed correcting Mom publicly was disloyal. She would have accepted being misunderstood to protect everyone else from discomfort. That version of me had awakened in a hospital room and found an empty chair. I attached the original surgical confirmation, Mom's false postponement message, and the dates of the trip. Then I wrote, my surgery was never postponed. Mom and Dad knew the date. Mom told the rest of you something different, so no one would change the trip. I woke after open abdominal surgery without a relative present. My resignation followed years of carrying responsibilities without authority and the decision to expect work from me during recovery. Caleb's graduation is not the reason I left. I removed nothing and added nothing. For several minutes, no one responded. Then, an aunt apologized. A cousin said she had believed the surgery was happening later. Another relative asked Mom why she had lied. Mom called me. I declined the call. Dad sent a message. This should not have been handled publicly. I replied, it became public when Mom gave everyone a false version of why I left. Then Caleb entered the conversation. Mom told me the surgery had been moved. Mara sent me the hospital record afterward. She is telling the truth. Mom responded immediately. Caleb, stay out of this. He did not. I was part of it, even though I didn't know the date. I accepted everything without asking what Mara was giving up. She isn't attacking me by telling the truth. The conversation exploded after that, but I stopped reading. I set the phone face down and sat alone in my townhouse. I had imagined that exposing the truth might feel powerful. It didn't. It felt like grief. I had wanted my mother to choose me in private. Instead, I had been forced to defend my reality in public. Still, something irreversible had happened. Mom was no longer the only person allowed to define what our family meant, and I was no longer alone inside the truth. Rosewood Hall survived my departure. That was important to me. I had not wanted my parents ruined. I had wanted them to stop treating my labor as proof that they could neglect me without consequence. They hired an interim operations manager and a part-time payroll contractor. Later, they added an administrative coordinator. 3 paid professionals absorbed most of the work I had performed under one title. The additional salaries forced Dad to revise the budget. Mom reduced the number of bookings and postponed an expansion she had been planning. The venue remained beautiful. Weddings continued. The business simply had to pay the real cost of its operation. Mom described the changes as damage I had caused. I stopped arguing. Caleb lasted another month in the role she had designed for him. Then, he declined the leadership track and accepted an entry-level marketing position with a regional company. Mom blamed me for that too, Caleb called after telling them. I don't want to take your place, he said. You couldn't. That sounded harsh. It wasn't. You're supposed to have your own place. He was quiet for a moment. I think Mom wanted Rosewood Hall to prove we were all staying together. She wanted the image, and you were holding up the building behind it. Something like that. Our relationship did not become instantly close. Some weeks we exchanged only 1 or 2 messages. I no longer reminded him about deadlines or solved problems before he asked. At first, he mistook that distance for anger. Eventually, he understood it as a boundary. Dad requested a meeting without Mom. We met in a quiet cafe. He arrived early and spent several minutes arranging the sugar packets beside his coffee. I knew your surgery hadn't been moved, he said. It was the first thing he told me. I know. I saw your mother's message. I know. I told myself correcting her would create conflict before the trip. So you let me carry it. Yes, he looked down. I've spent a lot of years believing that if I didn't make the bad decision, I wasn't responsible for it. I waited. I was responsible. There was no request for forgiveness attached, no explanation of the rental cost or Caleb's feelings, just responsibility. What happens now? He asked. Low contact. For how long? I don't know. Will you answer if I call? Sometimes. The answer hurt him. For once, he did not ask me to change it so he could feel better. Mom's first attempts were different. She sent long messages explaining her childhood. The pressure of maintaining Rosewood Hall, Caleb's sensitivity, and her belief that I would be safe with medical professionals. Every explanation placed her intention at the center. I answered only once. I understand why you made the choice. Understanding it does not require me to accept the relationship that produced it. Several weeks later, a letter arrived. This one was shorter. Mom acknowledged that she had promised to stay, chosen the trip, lied about the date, and used my strength as permission to leave me unsupported. She wrote that the benign pathology did not change what she knew when she left. It was the first apology that named her actions correctly. I read it twice and put it away. I did not call her. An accurate apology could open the possibility of repair. It could not recreate trust. My new job began quietly. On my first week at the Civic Center, a facilities problem threatened an event. My instincts took over. I created a solution, contacted vendors, and stayed late. The next morning, Anna called me into her office. I prepared to justify everything I had done. Instead, she asked, "Why did you handle all of that alone?" I knew how. That wasn't my question. She brought in the facilities manager and department coordinator. Together, we revised the emergency process so responsibility would be distributed next time. No one praised me for carrying everyone. They changed the system so I wouldn't have to. That felt unfamiliar enough to be frightening. It also felt like freedom. 6 months after the operation, my scar had faded from red to a pale line across my abdomen. It no longer hurt when I laughed. I had regained my strength, though I no longer treated strength as a promise that I would do everything alone. My follow-up appointment appeared on the calendar 3 weeks in advance. For 2 days, I considered going by myself. Then I called Imani. Are you free next Thursday morning? I can be. I have my follow-up. Do you want me there? The old answer rose automatically. You don't have to. I let it pass. Yes, I said. I want you there. I'll be there. Dad sent a message the night before the appointment, wishing me well. Mom asked whether I wanted company. I didn't answer immediately. Their messages were no longer emergencies. My silence was no longer punishment. Access to me had become something I could consider rather than something they could claim. The next morning, Imani drove us to the hospital. When the nurse called my name, I entered the consultation room and saw the same style of blue vinyl chair positioned beside the examination table. For half a second, I was back in that first room, disoriented, hurting, and searching for a mother who had chosen to be somewhere else. Then Imani sat down. She didn't make a speech. She placed her bag beneath the chair and asked whether I wanted her to take notes. My doctor reviewed the imaging and examination results. Everything looked reassuring. No new concern had appeared, and my remaining ovary was healthy. I exhaled. Imani smiled and squeezed my hand. My phone remained silent inside my bag. For a long time, I believed the empty chair beside my hospital bed proved something about me. I thought it meant I had failed to become important enough, vulnerable enough, or lovable enough for my parents to choose me. I understand it differently now. The chair was never a measure of my worth. It was a measure of their decision. And the chair beside me that morning represented mine. I could choose honesty over appearances. I could choose boundaries over promises. I could choose people who did not wait for me to collapse before offering care. Most importantly, I could stop calling abandonment independence simply because I had survived it. When I walked out of the hospital, Imani was beside me. Not because I had earned her presence, not because she needed something from me. She was there because I asked and because she freely chose to come. That was when I finally understood what family was supposed to feel like.